In this video, we're taking a look at 10 of Hogan's most outrageous ever lies. We all know that Hogan has always craved Hollywood legitimacy. I mean, it was even in his name during the late 90s. Hogan's Hollywood career in the 1980s was, let's just say, less than stellar. From the dubious honour of starring in Mr. Nanny, where he donned a tutu, to portraying an alien warrior in Suburban Commando, none of his roles quite managed to replicate his wrestling superstardom. The Rock, he certainly wasn't. That longing to be a Hollywood leading man came back in the mid-2000s when Hogan, in one of his many interviews, claimed that he was initially offered the lead role in Darren Aronofsky's Oscar-nominated film, The Wrestler. The Hulkster actually wants us to believe he could have been the one portraying Randy the Ram Robinson rather than Mickey Rourke. This particular lie was blown out the water by the director Darren Aronofsky himself, who denied that this was ever the case, tweeting out that the role was tailor-made for Mickey Rourke. But that wasn't the first time that Hogan had told lies about his movie career, which brings us neatly on to untruth number 2. This time we're switching gears from Hogan the actor to Hogan the screenwriter. The Hulkster would have us believe that he rewrote the scripts for some of his cinematic 80s and 90s masterpieces. Let's start with No Holds Barred, which was Hogan's debut as a leading man in Hollywood. The movie was a WWF production that put Hogan in the shoes of a character very much like himself, a wrestling superstar by the name of Rip Thomas. According to Hogan, he and Vince McMahon locked themselves in a hotel room the night before shooting, emerging with a completely rewritten script. Hogan's writing credits apparently didn't stop there. He went on to say that he also took it upon himself to revise the scripts for the family comedy Mr. Nanny and the not-so-classic Christmas movie Santa with Muscles, both films that he took the leading role in. In light of Hogan's wrestling career, where he has often had a say in his own storylines, it might seem plausible that he would want to control the scripts of the movies that he starred in too. But considering the critical reception that those movies received, perhaps the original screenwriters might not have minded him taking credit. There's no solid proof of Hogan's claims here. In fact, Hogan is not officially credited as a writer on any of these films. It's just another plot twist in the life of Hollywood Hogan. We've journeyed through the realms of movies and now it's time for some tall tales in the realm of rock and roll. According to Hogan, he was a session musician before becoming a wrestler, a bass guitarist. Hogan once claimed that he was pals with none other than Lars Ulrich, the drummer from Metallica. In an interview with the UK newspaper The Sun, Hogan claimed that Ulrich asked him to play bass with Metallica in their early days, but it didn't work out. The story went viral and Lars Ulrich got wind of Hogan's statement. During an appearance on the Howard Stern show, Ulrich made it abundantly clear that this absolutely didn't happen. Next up, we're staying in the world of music, but we're trading heavy metal riffs for blue suede shoes. According to a tale that was spun by the Hulkster in his autobiography, Elvis used to come and watch his matches when he was wrestling in Memphis. Elvis, of course, would be an incredibly cool and unique fan for any wrestler to have. But before we get ideas of Elvis sitting at ringside cheering for the Hulkster, let's take a moment to examine the timeline. Elvis Presley passed away in 1977, and while it's said that he did have an appreciation for pro wrestling, Hogan didn't step foot in Memphis until 1979. Elvis and Hogan being in the same place at the same time would have been physically impossible. As we've already found out, Hogan's ambition for recognition is vast, extending far beyond wrestling into Hollywood and even rock and roll. And now we can add legitimate combat sports to the list. MMA to be exact. Hogan has tried to suggest that back in 1993, when the UFC was still a start-up company, he was approached to join their ranks. We can't prove exactly whether that's true or not. You can make your own mind up. However, things don't conclude there when it comes to Hogan and MMA. Hogan also alleged that he had a run-in with a bunch of Pride fighters in 1977 and beat them in genuine fights. Bearing in mind that the Pride Fighting Championships didn't start until literally 2 decades later in 1997. Many mainstream celebrities were drawn to the WWF's electrifying atmosphere in the 1980s. Big names like Cyndi Lauper, Billy Martin, Liberace and Mr. T gave the first WrestleMania an undeniable touch of stardom. So, when Hogan casually mentions that comedy legend John Belushi hung out at WrestleMania 2 and even partied with him after the show, it didn't sound entirely far-fetched. Belushi and Hogan, two larger-than-life characters going head-to-head in an epic party after WrestleMania, sounds incredible. According to Hogan, he and Belushi partied so hard that he drank Belushi under the table. Hogan implied that Belushi couldn't keep up with the Hulkster's wild partying. It would have been a great story to tell if it weren't for one significant problem. John Belushi tragically passed away in 1982, a full 4 years before WrestleMania 2 in 1986. This unfortunate discrepancy casts a long shadow over Hogan's claim, reminding us once again to take his stories with a generous pinch of skepticism. Hogan continues to prove how terrible he is at mathematics in this next story. In his second autobiography, My Life Outside the Ring, Hogan declares that he wrestled a mind-boggling 400 days in a single year. He argues that due to constant trans-Pacific flights between Japan and the US, he was essentially extending his days beyond the conventional 24 hours, and therefore making his year longer than 365 days. That would be impressive if it weren't for the fact that it completely misunderstands how time zones work. Even if we were to believe that Hogan was bouncing back and forth between Madison Square Garden and the Egg Dome in Tokyo twice a week, he'd actually be losing time, not gaining it. But let's say we buy in to Hogan's time warping theory. There are still no records showing him wrestling in both locations on consecutive days, which completely disproves his statement. So while Hogan's claim of wrestling 400 days in a single year is certainly an impressive boast, it is quite definitely mathematically impossible. There is no doubt about it, Hulk Hogan vs The Rock at WrestleMania 18 was really fun to watch. Electrifying, you might say. Even though Hogan was years past his sell-by date, the energy in that stadium was off the charts. After the final bell, Hogan was seen wincing and clutching his ribs, making it look like he'd gone through a brutal war with the People's Champ. However, if you listen to Hogan's version of these events, the truth gets a bit murky. In one telling of the story, Hogan claimed that The Rock had broken his ribs in the match after giving him the rock bottom, but in another interview with Bill Simmons, Hogan changed his tune, alleging that Rikishi had actually inflicted the injury during a house show, leaving Hogan to face The Rock at WrestleMania with already broken ribs. Given Hogan's track record, it's likely that both of these stories are totally false. let's rewind back to 1991 to an incident that went beyond the bounds of the wrestling ring. This incident took place during the WWF Championship match at the Survivor Series in 1991 in Detroit, where Hogan lost the WWF title to The Undertaker. In the match, Ric Flair had slid a steel chair into the ring for The Undertaker to use, and he proceeded to drop Hogan with his tombstone piledriver. In the aftermath of his loss, Hogan claimed that the piledriver from The Undertaker had caused permanent, serious damage to his neck. The Undertaker was genuinely devastated backstage. For nearly 2 years, he shouldered the guilt of what he believed to be a devastating mistake. However, a twist in the tale occurred when Taker eventually had the opportunity to re-watch the footage of their match on VHS. What he saw on the tape was totally different from what Hogan was saying. On the video, it was clear as day that during the execution of the tombstone piledriver, Hogan's head didn't even come close to touching the chair, much less smash into it as Hogan had claimed. If there is one image that sums up Hulk Hogan's wrestling career, it's that amazing moment at WrestleMania 3 when he hoisted Andre the Giant over and slammed him into the mat. It is an unforgettable moment that's etched into the collective memory of wrestling fans, largely thanks to the fact that WWE replay it every 5 minutes. However, even this monumental moment hasn't been immune to Hogan's knack for telling tall tales. In his retelling of the event, Hogan asserted that he was the first person to ever slam Andre, despite other wrestlers having done it before. On an episode of MTV Cribs, Hogan claimed that Andre tragically died just a few days after the iconic body slam. Andre the Giant actually passed away in January 1993, a full 2,137 days after their face-off at WrestleMania 3 in March 1987. Clearly, Hogan's interpretation of a few days extends far beyond the conventional meaning. To further embellish this story, Hogan also said that he tore 18 muscles in his back from the exertion of slamming Andre. It is hard not to take pleasure in deconstructing Hogan's lies, but there's also a sense of pathetic sadness underneath the hilarity of it all. It's a shame that a figure as legendary and iconic as Hulk Hogan feels the need to embellish his already incredible career with such nonsense. Hogan, after all, is a titan of professional wrestling, a man whose name is synonymous with the business. Perhaps the mad world of pro wrestling has taken its toll on Hogan's memory, bending the reality of his past. Then again, it's equally likely that Hogan simply just enjoys telling tall tales. Whatever the case may be, one thing is very clear: Hogan could definitely benefit from a few additional lessons in math.